Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much for joining me. For those of you who are returning, thank you for sticking with me for this long. Thank you for just everything really. For those of you who are new here, my name is Silhouette. I am a drag queen from Thurrock in Essex in the UK. And I just wanted to combine my love for this character that I've created and also my fascination with true crime. So for today's case, I probably should have held on till a little bit later on in the year doing this, but it was one that I recently come across, someone that I've never heard of myself, so I just really wanted to give my in-depth story on this case. It's a shocker. I'm not gonna lie, it is a shocker. That someone went to the amount of level that this person did, but we're gonna get into all of that. I know at the end there is a little bit of a twist, and I'm gonna point that out to you guys a little bit later on. But for now, stick with me. So, the story begins in 2001. So, Tuesday the 11th of September 2001. It's a day that those of us who were alive, we will never forget. We all remember where we were on September the 11th, 2001. I was 9 years old. I was at school and I come home excited. I really wanted to watch a program that I really wanted to watch on TV. And instead, my mum had her friend Vivian over and they were watching the news coverage of 9/11 on the TV. On that particular day, 4 aircrafts were hijacked by a group of Islamic terrorists, and they committed some of the worst atrocities in American history. Or in world history really, and it cost the lives of almost 3,000 people. So the American Airlines Flight 11 was the first to hit the towers. That was hijacked by Mohammed Atta, Abdulaziz Amari, Wal Ashimari, Walid al-Sheri, and Satam al-Sukami. Several passengers, they were stabbed in the process of the men taking over the plane. And Mohammed Atta, he relays a message into the cockpit, from the cockpit, sorry. And he's just basically telling people that if they comply, they're going to be safe, no harm is going to come to them. After this message, the plane then crashes into the North Tower of the World Trade Center between floors 93 and 99. This was at 8:46 a.m. News cameras were already on the ground, relaying just events from around the world and what was going on in New York City at that time. And whilst they don't capture the initial shot, they obviously the aftermath and the explosion is heard throughout. It was initially believed that this was a freak accident, and all 92 people aboard that plane died.
Come to us, come to us. Come to us. Come to us. Hey, Beth. Whoa, what is that? Somebody hit the World Trade Center? Well,
it's a trade center.
World Trade Center.
Aboard that plane, there should have been Mark Wahlberg, the actor. Seth MacFarlane, he was due to be flying on that plane. Michael Jackson himself was due to have an appointment, a meeting in the North Tower that day. luckily those guys weren't there, but obviously, like I said, 92 people end up losing their lives on that plane. United Airlines Flight 175 was hijacked by Marwan al-Shahidi, Fayaz Bani Hamad, Mohand al-Shahiri, Hamza al-Ghamdi, and Ahmed Ghamdi. Again, several passengers were stabbed in the hijack, including the pilots. The pilots were actually killed. The plane then crashed into the South Tower at 9:03 a.m. This was caught live on TV. This happened between floors 77 to 85, and they killed all 65 people on board.
This just in, you were looking.
I know that now because at 9:03 is when United 175 crashed into the South Tower.
Oh, God.
There's another one.
Oh,
Oh my goodness, there's another one.
seems to be on purpose.
Another one just hit the building.
Wow.
Wow, another one here. Let me get into the space. The whole building just came apart. Holy smokes.
The towers, the World Trade Center towers, they were reportedly 110 stories each. So everyone who was above the floors of impact in both towers, immediately they died. There was footage of people hanging out of the windows. There's a really infamous footage of the man who's never been identified. He's fallen from the tower, and there's his final moments caught on camera. And that image was actually purchased by Elton John later on. Just, yeah, awful. And like I said, obviously this was all caught. The second impact was all caught on camera for the world to see. Later on, American Airlines Flight 77 was hijacked by Hani Hanjour, Khalid al-Mida, Nawaf al-Hazmi, Salam al-Hazmi, and Majed Moked. Now, in comparison with the previous two, no one on board of this flight were actually harmed in the process of the hijack. And they crashed into the west side of the Pentagon at 9:37 a.m. They killed all 64 people on board and 125 people in the Pentagon. If you're not sure what the Pentagon is, it's like a military base in a state in America, and it has four points all connected into a pentagon. The final attack was on United Airlines Flight 93. This was hijacked by Zia Jara, Ahmed al-Hasnawi, Ahmed al-Namiand, and Saeed al-Ghamdi. By now, the passengers on board this plane, they were all aware of the attacks on the World Trade Center and the one on the Pentagon. People had managed to reach them, people had managed to get hold of their loved ones, and they decide, once they realise that their plane is being hijacked, they decide to try and take over. Some brave passengers managed to break into the cockpit, and they try and overpower the hijackers. The hijackers initially, they wanted to crash into the White House, so where obviously the president is residing. The president at the time was George Bush. his reaction to all of this was also caught on camera. So George, at this particular time, he was doing a reading in a school and was with a bunch of school children, and one of his advisors comes over and says, oh, there's been an attack on the World Trade Center, the Pentagon has gone down, and you just see his expression going more and more blank as time goes on. And he got he got quite a lot of criticism for that, but at the end of the day, he wasn't going to be aware that America was going to be under attack on the day that he goes to see some school children. So like I said, some passengers managed to revolt, they managed to gain access to the cockpit, they try and overpower, and this ends up with the plane crashing into a field in Pennsylvania. And this was at 10:03 a.m. and it killed all 44 people on board. Now, like I said, in total, almost 3,000 people, so in total, 2,977 people lost their lives on this day. Surprising.
When did he land? Because we have information.
He did not land.
Oh, he's down?
Yeah, somewhere up northeast of Camp David.
Northeast of Camp David.
That's the last report. They don't know exactly where.
p.m. there was a large explosion at the World Trade Center, which caused the collapse of several floors in the basement of the parking level beneath Tower 1.
They streamed from the stairway by the hundreds, the joyful end of a 2-hour journey down the smoke-filled staircase, staggering, coughing.
5 are known dead at this point. More than 200 hurt in the blast that rocked the nation's second tallest building.
September 11th, and we are all going to go to the official ceremony at the site, and we hope to make it there by the first moment of silence at 8:46. It's one of the hardest experiences of my life to go down that ramp every anniversary, but I do it for Dave because I knew he wants me to be there. But let me show you something. Dave and I met outside the World Trade Center when he stole my cup. So every year when I go to the site, I bring a New York City cup with me and I put it in the reflection pool so that he knows that I remember that day.
Tanya Head.
You know, when I think about what Tanya was doing on 9.
Now, what surprised me about these attacks was, whilst doing my research, I discovered that this wasn't the first time that the World Trade Center had been a target. In 1993, there had been another bombing. So that happened on February the 26th, 1993 at 12:17 p.m. Ramzi Youssef, Ahmed Ajaj, Mohammed Salameh, Mahmoud Abjawali, and Saeed Ismail, and Nidal Ayad Abdul Rahman, they park a yellow van in the parking lot of the World Trade Center. So this was under the South Tower, and they pack out with 1,200 pounds of explosives. Now, what they intended to do was to cause the South Tower to topple into the North Tower, and they were unsuccessful at this. So the explosion did cause a significant amount of damage. 6 people lost their lives that day. Thousands were injured from the impact. The 6 people were all workers. There was 1 civilian, and one of those who died was 7 months pregnant. It was said that if the van had been parked a few feet over either side, to either the left or the right, the towers would have collided. The tower would have collapsed into the next one and brought them down. And not only that, just a few months later in 1993, another attempt was unearthed, and what they did when they got the mastermind behind the 1993 attack and brought him to justice, they literally flew him in a helicopter next to the towers, and they said, well, look, like, they're still standing, you're unsuccessful. And he just replied, well, if I had more money, they wouldn't have been. And in June that year, there was another attempt, and then in 1998, when Osama bin Laden, he first becomes connected with ISIS and Al-Qaeda, should I say, sorry, not ISIS. He is interviewed on TV, and he talks about plans for ultimate destruction in America. The World Trade Center to Al-Qaeda was seen as the money hub, the root of all evil in America, and the root of all evil for them was money, and money was what the World Trade Center was known for. So that's why they wanted it down so much. So like I said, obviously, above the floors of impact of the World Trade Center from the planes, only a small number of people managed to survive that. It was around 19, 20 people managed to survive. One of those was this lady, Tanya Head. She went on to tell her survival story numerous times, and she became really renowned for this incredible story that she told. She worked for Merrill Lynch, which was a big financial company in New York at the time. It still is quite a big financial company. She worked on the 99th floor of the South Tower. Now, during the impact, when the plane hits the tower, she witnesses her assistant decapitated immediately. Tanya's arm itself had been really badly damaged during the impact. In fact, it was holding on by a little single thread. She is holding on to her arm, making sure that it doesn't fall off. And she said that while she was trying to fight her way out of the building, a man climbed over the rubble and he was tugging on her arm, and she was screaming that, you know, he was going to pull her arm off. So she decides to tuck it in her coat. She said that a second man, who was basically almost dead himself, took off his wedding ring, gave it to her to give to his widow. At that particular moment, just as she was losing consciousness, she's rescued by a volunteer firefighter. His name was Wells Crofer. He was given the nickname the Man in the Red Bandana, and he was really heroic. He rescued so many people that day. There were a few other volunteer firefighters. The actor Steve Buscemi, he initially worked as a firefighter before he went into acting back in the 1980s, and he come out of retirement, his firefighting retirement, to help on this day. Wells manages to carry Tanya out of the building. He hands her to a colleague who carries her the rest of the way, and just at that opportune moment when the towers start to come down, this man, he throws her under the lorry, under the fire truck, sorry, to protect her. Wells, he wasn't so lucky to survive. He died in that impact. He was 24 years old. Tanya then spent the next 2 months recovering in hospital. She reflects on all that she's lost throughout this time. She had due to be married to, on the October the 12th, so just a month later, she was due to get married. This was to a man called Dave that she was obviously engaged to. Dave worked in the North Tower on floor 100. He had died. They met outside the World Trade Center some few months previous to this, and she almost describes like this whirlwind romance that you see sort of in a film. She hails down a taxi, he jumps in that taxi, and basically steals it from her, but later on they have a chance meeting again, and they realise that there's this mutual attraction, and they always have this, like, you know, typical sort of love story. Later on, so about a month before the attacks in August of 2001, Dave surprises her with a surprise trip to Hawaii. So Tanya, at this point, she had been working really, really hard, and she was really, really stressed. And Dave wants to take her away from all this. So she comes home, she's got rose petals leading everywhere. She walks into her dining room, she sees Dave standing there in a grass skirt and a coconut bikini. He's cooked her a Hawaiian banquet. He surprises her with 2 tickets to Hawaii that were leaving the very next day. What he didn't tell her is that he had got hold of her measurements for her wedding dress, sent it to another designer for them to design their wedding dress. Whilst in Hawaii, they have a ceremony. It wasn't an official ceremony, so Hawaiians will call it mauid rather than married. It's like a wedding, but it's not a wedding. She describes him as her love at first sight. She and Dave are almost the same person. They finish each other's sentences. He gives her an engagement ring from Tiffany's, and after hearing what happened to the ring during 9/11, Tanya lost her engagement ring. Tiffany's actually replaced it for her. And after Dave's death, so Dave ended up dying during the attacks. After this, a judge agreed to marry Tanya and Dave posthumously. So she effectively becomes a wife and a widow within the same day. She said that the last time that she spoke to Dave was at 8:30 a.m. He asked her if she wanted to get coffee. They meet for coffee. They exchange I love yous. After Dave's death, she would visit Ground Zero and leave a toy taxi by the memorial plaque. I'm just going to play you a little clip here and I'll be back. So Alicia first comes to New York in 2003. She moves there with her mother initially, and she begins accessing survivors' networks. So she's looking up different things about 9/11. She comes across a Yahoo chat group, and this is where she posts her story for the first time. It's through this story that she comes into contact with Jerry Bozak. Really sorry, Jerry, if you come across this. I actually did speak to Jerry prior to this, reached out to him, and so I do apologise if I'm butchering your name. He was running the World Trade Center Survivors Network. Now, what they did was they would head tours of Ground Zero. The survivors would share their stories, and they would raise a hell of a lot of money for victims of 9/11, victims' families. The two corresponded with emails. They then meet in person, and Tanya basically tells him that, you know, she's formed her own groups. They decide to merge the two groups together. Alicia then becomes acquainted with the other survivors. She becomes really close to a lady called Linda. There's also another lady called Elia who she becomes really close to. Now, Jerry said that he has some doubts about her injury. He said that it looked to him more like a skin graft than it did a genuine severing. Or a genuine burn, sorry. But he pushed those doubts to the back of his head because he didn't want to seem to be coming across as really heartless. She begins bleeding the walks around Ground Zero. She becomes, like I said, really close to Linda and Elia. She recounts her story to Linda, and she tells it to crowds. And this story then reaches Wells Crowther's family. So, obviously, like I said, everything that Alicia had said had happened to her on 9/11 didn't happen. The only two factors in her story that were true were Dave and Wells Crowther. We're going to get onto Dave in a moment. So, Wells Crowther's family, they request to meet Tanya. They want to meet the woman that was saved by their son. And Tanya, she is really reluctant to do this. She's showing real hesitance, and she puts it down to the fact that she's been almost victim blamed by other survivors' families, or people who died, their families have victim blamed her and asked her, well, why did you survive but my family member didn't? So she agrees to meet his family, but on the basis that it's incredibly private, no press, no one needs to know that they're meeting. So Wells Crowther's family, they're members of a really exclusive club called the Princeton Club. They take her out for dinner, and they initially get on, and she even goes as far as to say that she has saved a piece of her burnt clothing. The last thing that Wells had touched, she was going to frame that and give that to them. So Wells was 24 years old. Like I said, he volunteers as a firefighter. Also alongside, like I said, Steve Buscemi. And also there was Scott Michael Davidson. He is the father of Saturday Night Live comedian Pete Davidson. So Pete has previously spoken about this. He's made a few dark humour jokes about this. As the roast that was on... really infamous roast where Jimmy Carr, a UK-based comedian, makes a very dark joke about Pete's father. So both Wells and Scott had died during the recovery attempts. So obviously she knew that she wouldn't be able to be caught out if she mentioned Wells's name, because he wasn't there to fight his corner and tell his story. Soon, Alicia, she begins dripping her poison into Jerry's ear. She's telling him that the other members are not happy with the way that he's running things, that he's not representing them aggressively enough. Jerry then has a board meeting, and in this meeting, the most common name that keeps cropping up, the head of the complaints, is Tanya Head. In the group, they elect who they wanted as their next sort of president, and Tanya's name is put forward. So Jerry is effectively pushed out of the group that he had worked so hard to build up and raise so much money for. He's pushed out, and Tanya is given his position. Just bearing in mind, obviously, I'm going between the names of Alicia and Tanya. I am talking about the same person. When it comes to the day of the election, she rings Jerry and she tells him, well, you don't really want to be part of this, do you? You don't want to be sitting there listening to this. But he does. He goes there and he listens to everything they have to say. He twigs on that he's not going to be re-elected to the board. He told that Alicia is taking his place. And there's another member of the group, and his name was Brendan. He also becomes really suspicious of Tanya. He knows inconsistencies in her stories, and especially when it come down to talking about Dave. She was sort of flipped between calling him husband and fiance. So Brendan looks up Dave's name. He found that Dave was a real person. He had died during that time. He had died in the North Tower, like she had said. It seemed that he was an incredibly popular man. What he noted was, in every article that was about Dave, there was no mention of a wife, there was no mention of a fiance, there was no mention of a Tanya Head. Dave's family, they were contacted. They said they had never heard of Tanya. They requested that his name be kept out. So obviously Dave is his actual name, Dave. But they requested that the family name be kept out of any future publications just to respect their privacy, because his name had been slurried already and tainted by Tanya's lies. Other things Brendan took note of was that he would scour many articles and websites, and this was just so he could confirm who Tanya said she was. And nothing was coming up. He couldn't find any information on her, but he sat on this information. He kept it quiet initially. Around this time, Alicia, she was taking part in a therapy session called Flooding. She basically would sit in the therapist's office. She would recount every detail and record it. And all these details, they would be played back to her over and over and over again. Like I said, about the love at first sight thing, it's almost as if you watch the documentary on her and the way that she talks about Dave and their love at first sight meeting, it's almost like she's watched one rom-com too many. The boy meets girl for the first time, boy kisses girl. She almost glows. It's almost like a glowing energy as she's recounting all this. And to me, it's like listening to when a child talks about what their understanding of love is, not a full-grown adult woman or man, how they talk about what they think love is. So like I said, obviously she got really close to Linda, another survivor, and Linda even accompanies her to these flooding therapies. And Linda's having to sit there and listen to Tanya's voice talk about all this, and it gets to the point that it starts infecting Linda's brain, that she's up all night, she's having vivid nightmares of burning buildings coming down on top of her. Obviously she's already been through this, she survived this, she doesn't need to go through all this. So she bravely tells Alicia, I can't do this anymore, I can't come with you. And Alicia tells Linda and turns against her and said that, you're a horrible friend. Don't you realise the trauma that I've suffered? This is genuinely Alicia's words to Linda. Don't you realise the trauma that I've suffered is a lot worse than the trauma that you suffered? How can you do this to me? You're just a horrible friend. No friend would ever do this to their friend. So she's basically telling Linda that the fake trauma that she suffered is a lot worse than the actual genuine trauma that Linda has gone through herself. In 2007, the New York Times wanted to write an article about the Survivors Network, and this was 6 years on. And because obviously she was the head of the Survivors Network, they really wanted to speak to Tanya. She was really reluctant. She was telling the others that she didn't want to do the article. She claimed that the paper was harassing her. The particular journalist was really harassing her. They contact other members of the group, they contact Wells Crowther's family. Jerry was also contacted. And Jerry twigs on that this isn't an article about what he's been led to believe. This is an investigation. They're on to Tanya at this point. They've noted inconsistencies. They continue trying to contact Tanya to no avail. She tells Linda that Merrill Lynch had arranged a conference at the St. Regis Hotel, and this was to commemorate the 11 co-workers that had died during 9/11, and the families all wanted to speak to Tanya. So she calls Linda and claims that the families were basically bullied. So she goes to this conference and she then calls out to Linda and says, oh, the families are really bullying me, they're being really horrible, they're blaming me for their co-workers' deaths, why couldn't I have rescued them? Linda goes down to the St. Regis Hotel. She finds Alicia crying outside and saying, I tried to get the people out. Linda asks what she can do, and Alicia says that she wants to go visit Dave. So before they go, Linda does speak to the St. Regis Hotel. She then takes Tanya, who she believes to be Tanya. They go to Ground Zero, they look at the memorial, and Tanya just sits there. She's stroking Dave's name, and this seems to bring her some sort of peace. She manages to calm herself down, and she just looks at Linda and says, oh, it's okay, you can go now. Linda then recalled that she had gone back into the St. Regis Hotel and asked to speak to Merrill Lynch. She recounts what they had done, what she had just been told by Alicia. They have no idea. Merrill Lynch hadn't had a meeting in the St. Regis that night. Merrill Lynch hadn't even had offices in the World Trade Center. Their offices were based a few blocks away in 2001. They basically have no idea what Linda is talking about. Another member of the survivors group, Elia, so she recalls how Alicia had begged her to contact the reporter to say, leave me alone. And Elia does so, and she's doing this for the goodness of her friend. And Alicia then turns on Elia and tells her, you're probably just going to make it worse. You've just made it a lot worse by telling them that. Another member, Janice, she calls and says to the reporter, can you just wait until the anniversary is over? Let us get the anniversary out of the way, and then she's probably going to be more reluctant, more willing to speak to you. But he just tells Janice, why can't she answer the questions that I've got? The night before the anniversary, on the 10th of September 2007, Alicia... each year, so not just 2007, each year on the 10th of September, she would host a barbecue at her house. And on the 10th of September 2007, she keeps up this tradition, but the other members, they notice that she's really vacant. She's not engaging with them as she usually does. Whilst Linda, Elia and Janice, they're showing her some concern, they're really concerned about their friend, Brendan, he twigs on, and he said that he knew the reporter had found something out. He, like Jerry had said, they're onto her, they know something. Linda takes her to one side. She begs Tanya to give her some information that she can go to the reporter to say, okay, she's not lying. She asks for the name of the firefighter who Tanya had been handed to. So Wells Craver had given her to another firefighter, remember? And this firefighter had thrown her under a fire truck to protect her from when the tower collapsed. She begs and begs and begs. Tanya doesn't give her that information. So Janice then tells her, well, get yourself a lawyer. Get yourself a lawyer and they can protect you. So she accompanies Alicia the next day to a lawyer's office. The lawyer says to her, oh, because it doesn't really concern you, you have to wait outside. So she's like, that's fine, I'm just here as support, you know, supporting my friends. 2 hours later, Tanya emerges. Janice is called into the office. The lawyer then reads back everything, and basically the crux of it is, well, it's okay that, you know, you only knew Dave a few months, but then obviously to them, well, these two were married. You know, they had been married posthumously. They'd been together for some time. They had the ceremony in Hawaii. He says it's okay that you're only in the US for a short while. It was okay that you were only visiting the World Trade Center that day. You didn't actually work there. Janice then informs the other survivors of what she had just discovered, what she had heard, and other discrepancies that she had been told, including that Tanya had been a student at Harvard University. She had gained a business graduate degree from Stanford University. Those universities were also contacted. They had no recollection, no file on their system involving a student named Tanya Head. Merrill Lynch was then contacted. Again, they had no file on an employee named Tanya Head. They then recount, like I said, that they never had office space in the World Trade Center in 2001. The investigation, it unfolds a lot more. It then becomes public knowledge, the amount of lies and deceit that she has gone through. She's removed as the president of the World Trade Center Survivors Network on the 27th of September 2007. And her successor, Richard Zimbler, said, there was no reason to doubt her story. She looked the part, and the arm injury and story was realistic to us. Other bizarre lies that she had told people in the network, that, like I said, she had had a piece of her clothing she had worn that day framed, and she was going to give it to Wells Craver's family. She told Linda that her brother had died and that his wife was actually pregnant at the time. And before his death, he had agreed to name the baby Dave. I actually come across... So, one part of that is true. One of the brothers had indeed died in 2008, so after this story had aired. He had indeed been married. Him and his wife had children. None of the children were named Dave. She even concocted like really bizarre stories and just mundane lies about this life that she was leading in New York. She told Elia about a dog that she had called Elvis, and she lived with her housekeeper, a woman called Lupe. And Elia said that one day, after being told that Lupe was taking Elvis for a walk, she got really annoyed about this. And it really makes me laugh, this part of the sorry guys, cut off there a little bit. It really makes me laugh, this part of the documentary. You have to watch it. But Elia just basically confronts her and says, Tanya, do you or do not have a dog? And Tanya's just sort of like evasive, and she's like, well, yeah, of course I've got a dog. She doesn't. Elvis doesn't exist. So it was her brother Pablo that I just spoke about that had died, and an obituary that I found mentions obviously children, no mention of a child named David. After the exposure and after all the lies had come out, it seems that she had just basically fled Manhattan and set up somewhere else. In early 2008, Elia receives an email from her, and the email just basically says, "Hi, how are you?" Them lines. Elia just completely disregards that and deletes it. Not long after that, the other survivors, they all receive emails saying that Tanya Head had committed suicide. And they believe it's just the end of it, you know, okay, that's that chapter closed with. But if you know Tanya, she wasn't dead. That was another lie. As on September 2011, she's spotted in a New York high street. And I'm going to play this clip to you guys. It's the best thing I've ever seen. It's almost cited like we've spotted Bigfoot. So I'm just going to pause it and play that for you guys. That was filmed by the documentary maker, the woman who wasn't there. His name was Angelo J. Guamo, and Tanya is confronted alongside with her mother Acacia. And obviously, like as you saw in that clip, she becomes really hostile and aggressive. By the summer of 2012, it appeared that she had moved back to her native Barcelona. She begins working at an insurance company, but she's later fired from her position when they become aware of the deception that she had done in New York. In 2021, Alicia and her mother began a renovations company in Barcelona. So effectively, someone in Barcelona right now could be having their house redesigned, remodeled, redecorated by one of the biggest scam artists in the world. The funny thing is, she never made any money from these claims. So effectively, because there was no money handed over and she made no money, there was no embezzlement, she wasn't charged with anything. Police basically said, well, there's no crime that's been committed. I think Alicia, for all levels, I think she has a lot of unresolved issues from when she was a child, and this was just her way of trying to stand out. For me personally as well, she appears to be one of those people who's a one-upper. You know, obviously it doesn't matter that you've been to Tenerife, they've been to 11erife. We've all come across someone like that in our time. I remember a retail position I had many years ago. There was a woman that worked there, and she was basically one of these, you know, if it happened to you, if you got spat on the street, it didn't matter because she had been phlegmed on, but her mother had had a lot worse done to her on the street. And I'll never forget one particular time, one of the boys that I was working with, he originally, obviously I'm based in the south of the UK, he originally come from the north of the UK, and he had some family that still lived up in the north. And this particular year, his grandmother had just passed away. She had been diagnosed with terminal cancer and she'd passed away. And he asks for some time off to obviously go back up north to visit family, attend the funeral, and all of that. Completely innocent. And anyone else, you watching this, myself, you know, we would sit there and be like, okay, yeah, that's fine. Like, you know, let's get that sorted out for you. Not this lady. she took this as an opportunity to do her one-upmanship, and she basically looks this grieving person in the eyes, her grieving colleague, her grieving worker, and says, well, I knew someone who had the worst cancer in the world, but they survived it. And the assistant manager is basically saying next to her, it's like, okay, now's not the time, Sharon. Like, now is not the time. So one of those people, I think, yeah, she's just a complete one-upper. She has to go just that one step better, one step bigger than the next person. Like I said, obviously, they weren't able to charge her with anything. No charge. Again, just reiterate, at the end of the day, she committed no crime. She actually made a lot of money for the Survivors Network. More money than any of the other presidents, it seemed. There were people who did submit false claims to the Widows Pension Fund. They basically gave him false stories saying that their partner had died in 9/11 and they were given a substantial payout for those deaths, except those they were not connected to the person that they were claiming for. So they did end up facing criminal charges for that. And then there was the comedian Stephen Ranazizi. He made a very similar claim to Alicia's. He also claimed to be working for Merrill Lynch. He said that the offices were on the 54th floor, not much higher up, as Alicia had said. And he said that after the attacks, he had moved to Los Angeles. He was also contacted by the New York Times in 2015, and they basically debunked all of his claims, and he just basically admitted it. He said, okay, yeah, it was a lie. It was a lie that I told in Los Angeles to gain some traction. He said that it was his way of trying to fit in with the Los Angeles crowd, and you know, he gained a little bit of traction for his comedy routine. And there's been some others, there's been quite a few other famous cases on this, but I think Tanya's is, from doing my own research, she's one of the biggest ones. But just made no money from it. She seemed to do more help, bizarrely. She just didn't help the people that she become friends with at the end of the day. And they probably still feel the after effects of this. But that is all I've got for time for you guys today. Feel free to leave a comment down below. I always read your comments. Let me know what you guys think. If you've got any connections with the 9/11, you know, where were you on 9/11, those sort of things. Or if you've got any false feelings about Tanya Head, please feel free to leave them down below. What I will ask is, any of you conspiracy theorists out there, because there's a lot at the moment about well, the whole thing was staged, and you know, how did they retrieve this, how did they retrieve that. I ask you to keep those opinions to yourself. Anything that, you know, oh, it was for some reason the Jewish community again the blame for this and things like that. I just ask you to keep those opinions to yourself, because they're really not helpful, and I don't want to upset anyone who was directly involved, directly infected by the atrocities that happened on 9/11. So as always, just a huge thank you to you guys, and I'll see you guys real soon for the next true crime story with Silhouette. Take care, guys, and I'll see you real soon.